Ida B. Wells. Her occupation: journalist, newspaper editor, civil rights and women's activist. She was born July 16, 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She died March 25, 1931 in Chicago, Illinois. Her education: Fisk University, Rust University. She was best known for being an African-American journalist and activist who led an anti-lynching crusade in the United States in the 1890s. She was one of the founders of the NAACP in 1909. Ida B. Wells went to work as a teacher. Wells was beyond annoyed by the segregated school system, where white teachers were paid $80 a month, where black teachers were only paid $30 a month. The discrimination that was displayed caused her to gain interest in the politics of racism and on ways to advance the education of African Americans. Ida B. Wells moved to Memphis, Tennessee in order to receive higher wages as a teacher. She gained employment in the Woodstock for the Selby County school system. Wells spent her summer vacations attending summer sessions at Fisk University, where she implemented her very strong political opinions and engaged many people to agree with her views on women's rights. On May 4, 1884, Ida B. Wells had brought a first-class ticket for a seat on a train. Wells was ordered to give up her seat. She was informed that first-class section was only for whites. Wells didn't want to give up her seat. The conductor dragged her off the train. She was infuriated and decided to hire an African-American attorney to sue the railroad. Wells wrote a newspaper article for The Living Way, a black church weekly, about the treatment on the train, which generated tremendous public interest. Soon after, her lawyer was paid off by the railroad, which made her hire a white attorney. Wells won her case, and she was granted $500. Unfortunately, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the decision of the lower court's decision in 1887. Wells' creative writings made way for her to becoming the editor for The Living Way and The Evening Star and Free Speech. Ida Wells used a pen name of Iola. Ida B. Wells quoted that she had an instinctive feeling that people who had little or no school training at all should have something coming into their homes weekly, which dealt with their problems in a simple and helpful way. So in the letters to The Living Way, she wrote common sense way on things which concern the people. Knowing their education was limited, she never used a word of two syllables where one would serve the purpose. One reporter noted, "Miss Ida B. Wells, Iola, has been called the Princess of the Press, and she was well earned the title." In March of 1892, Wells had three close friends who were owners of a grocery store in Memphis. They were considered uppity, which caused anger of white men. So a white mob decided to destroy the store. But the black men decided to defend themselves, and they were imprisoned because of it. They were supposed to go to trial, but a white mob lynch broke into the jail and killed them. This infuriated Ida B. Wells, and she advised many blacks to leave Memphis, and about 6,000 left. Ida B. Wells decided to look into the causes and reasonings of lynchings, and her investigative journalism looked into the charges of these lynches. Blacks were beat and shot and hung and burned for menial things. There were also the charges against black men for rape of white women, which was condoned by the Protecting of White Women. Wells decided to speak on the issue at different women's clubs. She raised more than $500 to help raise and investigate and to publish her developments. Ida B. Wells also wrote that there were mostly consensual relationships between these black men and white women. This caused whites to become very angry. Wells published a pamphlet entitled Southern Horrors, Lynch All in All Its Phases. She came to the conclusion that many cried rape to cover up the real reasons for lynchings. She stated that the real issue was due to the economic progress of blacks. Wells spoke publicly about how she had one life to live and she would defend herself by any means necessary. She exclaimed that if anyone threatened her or her family, she would use her pistol and take them out with her. Ida B. Wells also published a report titled The Red Record. It described lynching in the United States since the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Wells said that during Reconstruction, most Americans outside the South didn't even realize the increased violence upon black people in the South. Ida B. Wells was one who created the developed many African women's groups in Chicago and Boston. Wells put in everything she had to stand up for women's rights to vote. She also befriended both Susan B. Anthony and Jane Addams, and becoming a familiar face at suffrage meetings. She then became the initial woman representative to a press convention. Following in 1889 at the Washington, D.C. convention, Wells was elected secretary to the National Press Association. This is where she met Frederick Douglass and collaborated with him in writing a pamphlet titled Reasons Why the Colored Americans is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition, in response to the exclusion of blacks in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. This was information on how blacks have progressed since their arrival in America, and it was distributed to over 20,000 people. Wells was also an activist for the end of segregated schools, and she set up the first kindergarten in a black neighborhood. In 1893, Wells set out on a tour of England, Scotland, and Wales, encouraging international organizations to put pressure on America to put an end to segregation and lynching. Wells noted that since slavery time, 10,000 Negroes have been killed in cold blood without the formality of judicial trial and legal execution. Ida B. Wells found the National Association of Colored Women and the NAACP. Wells formed the Negro Fellowship League in 1910, which she housed in a 3-story building on the south side of Chicago. This was used to fellowship for new settlers from the South and provided space for religious services and employment offices and homeless shelter for men. Wells founded the first black women's suffrage club in 1939. By 1930, she had grown impatient with the politicians in Chicago's black ghetto, which pushed her to run for the Illinois State Senate, in which she did not win. Ida B. Wells married attorney Ferdinand L. Barnett, who was a widower with 2 sons. Ida B. Wells gave birth to 4 children. Wells explained on how difficult it was for her to divide time between her family and her work. Wells gave birth to her first child as she continued to work and travel. Then she gave birth to the second child, and she was trying her best to be there for her work and her family. Susan B. Anthony tells her that she seems to be distracted. Wells then decided to come out of her touring and public life for a little time. Ida B. Wells continued her work in the community until the end of her life. She was not letting go of changing the conditions and poverty and challenges of Chicago's South Side. Ida B. Wells deceased on March 5, 1931, at the age of 69. While she may not have achieved in every endeavor she set out to make, Wells truly committed to making sure that the unfair treatment of blacks and women, and especially black men, were going to be noticed and accounted for. The things she accomplished in the time of struggle for her and her people showed how many that even with the struggles of life, you can still make change. Ida B. Wells was indeed one of the 20th century's most memorable women.